Join us here on the Lions Guide podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by one of the hosts of the Unbroken Veterans Podcast, Sam La Piana. And if this is your first time joining us here at Lions Guide, I'm Dale Walls. I'm the founder. And we're here to empower you, everyday people, to be world-class leaders. We believe that leadership is at the core of our personal and professional success. So we bring our guests on to kind of explore their stories and the lessons they've learned, so that you can leverage their insights in your own success. So, Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Sam La Piana, and I am currently in the Army Reserve. I am a combat engineer, 12 Bravo, specializing in route clearance. So that's finding IEDs on roads or footpaths and eradicating them. And on the civilian side, being in the reserve, I have a civilian job. So I sell industrial valves, to be specific. And I also run Unbroken Veterans Podcast with my co-host and co-veteran, Nick Meisner, who will probably be on another episode, or I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Anyway.
We'll figure it out. It'll be a part two. We'll get Nick on.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, awesome. So what was your decision to get in the Army? I guess, was that like something a lot of folks fresh out of high school, fresh out of college? Like what's the story behind becoming a soldier?
So it's kind of funny is I remember recruiters in high school, and I considered very lightly like joining the Marines. I kind of talked to the guy, I got the brochure, and then it was highly encouraged by my parents to go to college. So I did do that. But then afterward, I graduated in 2010, technically 2011, which is another story. But I kind of joked I graduated in a time of, joblessness. People that had careers were getting laid off, everything. And I really wasn't sure what to do. And so somebody I knew had been in the Navy for years, and when I knew them, they were out, and they encouraged me. They knew I was kind of interested, and they said, probably the best advice was, there's no way you could be worse off, which, I mean, is true to one degree or another. I'd say mostly true. So
now, is that because you were on kind of like an empty path at that time, and they're like, hey, it can't be any worse than where you're at now?
Exactly. And not that I was working a hardware store, and there was potential to go to another job or find something else, which I did do because I've only been in the reserve the whole time. I almost went active duty. That was kind of my intention. And then at the last minute started dating a girl, which that didn't pan out either, but that's fine because I wouldn't have ended up in the reserves had I not dated her. And so I decided to do the reserves, see where that relationship went. It went nowhere, but if I hadn't been in the reserves as possible, I wouldn't have met my now wife. So funny how life goes. So anyway, but kind of the last, one of the final straws was I would see guys, and everyone sees them. It's an old dude, and he's got the black veteran hat, and doesn't matter what branch they were in, it references how they served. So like it'll be U.S. Army or 82nd Airborne, or it'll be the USS whatever. And so I always thanked those guys for the service and appreciated it, but I kind of realized that the best way to thank them was to go serve as well. And
right.
So being a mostly able-bodied person, I should be able to do that. So I did that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so what was the tie break between Marines and Army? And did you talk to any other branches?
I actually didn't. So the only time I talked to a Marine recruiter was that time in high school. And so I was going to go Navy, and then decided I wanted a gun. And I know I could have tried to be high speed in the Navy, but the young dude in my 20s who'd never been incredibly fit, he's trying to just straight up join the SEALs. And if I fail, end up painting boats for a living, didn't seem like a risk I wanted to take. And so I thought I wanted to carry a gun, do more soldier-esque stuff. And then wandering around Missouri with a gun in the woods, I was like, maybe I didn't want a gun. But in the end, I'm glad I went the Army. So that's why I went the Army. I'm not really 100% sure why. I kind of leaned Army versus Marines. I think it just seemed like Army had more expansive opportunities. And they do in the reserve, that's for sure. I know a lot of Marines that I've met through the reserves that are in the Army, and when they left active duty Marines, they became reserve Army because of opportunities. So.
Right. Did you, so did you kind of like stay working at the hardware store and kind of go do boot camp and all that stuff? Like kind of what changed for you life wise as you kind of like join the army? Because right, you do go to boot camp, right? And then you kind of
Yep.
split out.
You do. Yeah, you do everything. Certain Army schools, there's a reserve version and other stuff like boot camp, basic training. Everybody has to go to that. And so there's no watered down version, which there shouldn't be, especially for boot camp. So National Guard and Reserve and Active Army all go to the same boot camp. And so the reason I kind of things where they went life-wise was I ended up leaving the hardware store, went to sell cars at an Infinity dealership. And then from there, actually it was like 2 weeks in, and this guy was like, hey, I like the way, you write emails and handle customers. I'm not really interested in buying a car from you right now, but here's my card if you're interested in a different form of sales. And so what's funny is that was in 2012, and that guy's my boss right now.
Wow.
For the second time, too. Kind of my brief overview of my civilian career. So I worked at Infinity and then left, ended up a few months later trying to get out of the car business, ended up back in the car business at Acura, had some issues with the dealership, went back to Infinity. And then, but it was while I was at Acura that I called this guy and was like, hey, you gave me your card 2 years ago. It's 2 years ago at this point. Dang. And I was like, I am interested in another version of sales. And so he kind of had to jog his memory, and he was starting an opening. And then it wasn't until I went back to Infinity that he ended up, he had the time and the space and everything to work me in. And so it's kind of funny leaving Infinity again, but I ended up, I'd help out on busy weekends and stuff here and there, make a little extra money on the side. But so anyway, I worked there. And then a couple of years later, I had an opportunity to go to work for a manufacturer and did learn my lesson. Corporate America is not for me in most cases. So then I had it out with my boss and I got fired. And this is one of those, it's good kind of thing because I've been traveling 50% of the time. I had a daughter who wasn't even one. And so I went from not a lot of time with her to all the time with her, and then found out I was deploying. And so I attribute a lot of our closeness, even now, especially what helped when I got back from deployment, was all that extra time I got to spend. So it's interesting that any time I've been fired in my life has been actually a really good thing. And so, anyway, it's kind of the roundabout of my civilian career. So then anyway, on deployment, because my now boss, again, he had been a mentor in the industry, remained a friend and mentor of mine. So we talked about me coming back. And so when I came back from deployment, had this job all ready to go. And I've been here, I got back in 2020. So it's been over 3 years.
Oh, wow. So what exactly do you do there?
So I sell valves. I'm inside and outside sales. And so I go to power plants, water, wastewater stations, factories, like M&M, places like that. And I sell them stuff either for their process or other things they have going on. Help them solve problems. Doesn't always mean I sell them something. Oftentimes it does, but it just depends. So here I am.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I found that, maybe this is a little sidebar. I don't know, look, being in the military, being a veteran, like we're always like front and center, especially if you become NCO and stuff like that. You run a platoon and so gigs like sales and business development that are like high engagement, like I feel like we can kind of just like roll right in those. Like we'll talk to anybody. It's like no big deal. Like I had a lot of success in my post-military civilian career just because like I can talk with people. I mean, I've got no
Right.
no problem getting up in front of people.
Right.
I can do my thing, and I credit a lot of that just to the rigors of that in the service. Like you're always standing in front of like whether it's the platoon or in front of brass or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But were you officer enlisted?
No, actually, I enlisted even with the college degree. I figured I could always go officer if I wanted to, and about 11 and a half years later, I never did. But yeah, so I'm an NCO, and but you're totally right, and that's kind of one of the things we hammer on Unbroken Veterans is like, hey, even if you think, because there's this kind of belief that like, some people will go join the military and they become a plumber, like for the Army. Nothing wrong with that. They figure they learn the jobs set. It's something easy to transition to into the civilian side when they're done serving, and they're totally right. But the other side of that coin is that a lot of people think, oh, I was infantry, or like my job, I look for explosives. And other than select trades, like being a police officer or something, you think you don't have anything to offer, but you're really wrong. Again, we talk about, time management and planning is beaten into your head. Tactical awareness, just paying attention to your surroundings. Just like you said, having to speak. I'm kind of notorious for, I'm kind of the platoon or unit wordsmith too, is a lot of my sales and management goes to the Army, but my management and sales in the Army goes back to my civilian job, because I just know how to present information. And most of the time I use those powers for good. But every once in a while I use it to serve my Joes and not necessarily myself or someone else. So you're totally right. Military having you kind of almost groomed for a sales job, depending on where you fit in the platoon. Are you a talkative guy? Well, you could probably go definitely make some sales calls. My boss, he's a chatty guy, and he was in the Air National Guard for 13 years, I want to say. So yeah, it really does prep you very well.
Yeah. And I think especially on the sales side, the people, soft skills and engagement skills, whatever. Yeah. I wouldn't call it extroversion. I consider myself, I'm a bit of an introvert, at heart, but I don't have a problem talking to people, so I wouldn't say it's like veterans are extroverts. I wouldn't go so far, but, I would say the requirement of service to be highly engaged with others, whether it's within a team, leading a team, following whatever, when it comes to sales, and you couple that with that, what we've got, that mission accomplishment mindset, because that's where people die on the vine of sales, right? They just aren't willing to kind of persevere, right? Keep working. And I feel like we come out with that much, if nothing else. If you're making it through boot camp, you're coming out with some sort of form of perseverance, that, making calls and getting rejected. And, even with clients I work with today, I go, you're not making a call because you're afraid of that. No, you're afraid of that rejection. It's not that you couldn't have that conversation, but you fear the rejection. I don't think we always have that problem.
I joke all the time that I get rejected for a living. This is my job. And I mean, an outstanding or borderline outstanding closing rate is 25%. And so sometimes the way I explain it to people is I say, okay, look, if I give you a list of 500 people to call, you'll get a handful, if not 25%. Again, that's a good rate, and it takes a little skill to get there. But some people will want more information, or they'll buy the product. A lot of it is just a numbers game. So it takes that perseverance of, where I said, if I told you that every 10 calls you make, the 10th person will do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, would you just make 10 calls, constantly? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, it's almost how it is in reality, except you're not guaranteed it's the 10th person you call, but you got to call X amount of people. So many failures will equal a success no matter what. It's just the odds are, you can't bat 1,000, but you're also, it'd be hard to bat 0 as well. So Then you introduce a little skill, knowing what to say or what to ask, that will increase your odds. And so there's really kind of a science to it, because never have been, especially selling cars. And that's why I sold premium cars, was being more pushy, or, trying to be forceful. That wasn't my thing. It all about finesse and, explaining things. And that's why anytime I sold anything, I did research before committing to selling a product or selling a line, because I wanted to understand, what the benefits are. And, in the industry I'm in now, I don't really have to worry about selling a bad product, but like cars, I wanted to sell a car I believed in. I liked Infinities a lot. So it just goes to, a little bit of tangent there, but it goes to, how you formulate everything. So yeah.
Yeah. Look, I have to explain to people all the time because I really despise like, today's technology. Here I am, a technology guy about to say this, but like, people don't want to talk. They want to do text and
I
do
hate
everything
it.
over email. And I have to explain to people and say, especially leaders, to go, look, humans are designed to communicate way more sophisticated than that. Like it's our words, it's our tonality, it's our expressions that we're given, so you need all of the above. You can't communicate effectively with just the words, especially of text,
Right.
when it's all
Oh yeah.
gobbledygook, freaking, responding back like, what do you mean by,
Yeah.
BTW, whatever. But and so, man, so the ability to just communicate well will get you so far, and I still today,
Mhm.
like I pick up the phone and call people, it's just like, I don't want to, we mentioned on the pregame, I coach youth football, and I tell the coaches, I'm rotating down back to the younger age group. So I'm taking on a new staff and stuff. And I got to tell everyone, like, we're not having a conversation over text ever. If there's a conversation to
Mhm.
be had, we're on a scheduled time, because I'm not having we will not have a conversation ever over
Yeah.
text, period. It's just not happening.
Yeah. It's that thing where like I like interacting with someone on the phone because my tone, I can try to be more funny. Usually the way my humor goes with emails is I kind of say something and then it totally goes over their head, understandably. And then I make fun of myself. And that's really most of the time me getting humor out of emails. But at the same time in sales, with kind of going back to what we were talking about with the Army relation, so much of sales, at least for the way I do it, is dissemination of information.
Mhm.
Customer's a question, I go to manufacturer, I get an answer, I send it back to the customer. Well, then in that dissemination, there's a lot of like, you can cover your ass. You can prove, hey, I told you this last August, or, hey, I never got this bit of information. So I'm so torn because the cover your ass thing is nice, but at the same time, sometimes, and I don't get told this so much, but sometimes my boss says it to others, is like, sometimes you got to pick up the phone. And yeah, it's especially when you're working on relationships, because again, someone like me, the way I operate in sales, big relationship person, it's just hard to formulate a really good relationship over black and white.
Maybe you can relate to this, but like one of the things I always ran into on the sales side of business was people would say, just send me the quote. I say, I don't send quotes. I present quotes. So when you're ready to see the quote, let's book a call. I'll walk you through it. We'll have a meeting, and see, like, really Zoom was really a thing since 2020. So it's fresh probably in your world. My world, it was, if I had a, initial discovery meeting, I would set up a presentation meeting at the end of that one, usually same bat time the following week, same time, same day, everything, usually, because it worked today, so it should work next week usually.
Yeah.
And but I would tell them, like, hey, I will come back and present the proposal, because people would say, just send it to me. Well, when you and I'm saying this for the benefit of people out there listening that are maybe in our trade or looking to get into sales, all they're going to do if you send them the quote is they're going to go straight to the bottom line, and then they're going to judge everything off the number.
Yeah.
But there's a value proposition to be made. There's objections to be overcome. There's and I kind of try to get people to think of sales as leadership. Like, you're leading a prospect or a client to a desired outcome, a win-win desired outcome, right? It's a win for you. It should be a win for them, right? It should be something that they need. And we kind of need to lead the way to that, right? We don't just kind of like be an innocent bystander and let them kind of drive. You kind of go, let me lead you to a desired outcome. I mean, that's the way I've always looked at it anyway.
I do it like consultative sales. Now, a lot of businesses is, I mean, I don't say guaranteed, but more than likely, depending on the customer. I know they're coming to me, I'm their valve guy, or I know that in this scenario, I'm already ahead, if I quote a project, because I quote engineers too, right? Like Black and Beach or Kiewit, some of the big names. But anyway, but I look consultative sales, and I try to educate the customer. Again, just for me, I educate them in general. So I don't try to educate them why this particular thing that only I sell is the only answer. I don't play that game. But what I do is give them general education, if they're lacking it, about what scenario we're looking at, what their options are. That's one of the biggest is, okay, here are your options, and here's what I recommend. And then kind of using that to gain business too, because I'm the one that clearly knows what's going on. I developed a saying when I worked at the hardware store, because it always just drove me crazy the way people would say, well, the customer's always right. And I'm like, no, they're not. I'm the professional. That's why they're asking me. Now, I don't have to be a dick about it. Or if they want it this way, then just sell it. There are salesmen, especially in cars sales, that I saw where it was almost like they argued with the customer what the customer is buying. And I'm like, well, you're totally right. That's what the customer needs, option B, but they want option A. And so that's where, like, because for the Equalizer movie, when he's like, they pay, they say. And I'm like, now that's one I can get behind, they're not always right in terms of what the best product is, but they're right in which one they want to spend their money on. And, I feel like if at the end of the day, I did a good job explaining the scenario and they still wanted to choose whatever they wanted to choose, that's their decision. And there's nothing wrong that I did. And maybe, they know their situation better than me. So kind of going with that. So,
you ever see that? And this goes back to the CYA thing you mentioned earlier. You ever run into the customer amnesia though? You're telling them, hey, B is the right thing. And they go, no, it's not A. I want A. And you go, but really B fits your needs. And then they get A, and then a week or month or whatever goes by. And it's, well, you sold me this freaking A, well, it's crap. It doesn't work. And you're like, well, sir,
hey,
actually.
Yeah. Luckily, I don't run into that too much. I thought I was afraid of running into that in the car business and really never did for the roughly 2 years I was in. But like language especially is a big one in valves. Sometimes they don't know what a word means. So like, for instance, to give a brief example, so you got a butterfly valve. I don't think I have any in my office or pictures or anything, but you got a butterfly valve. It's skinny, and then it's got the butterfly that turns when you turn the handle on the top. And there's technically 3 ways, but 2 main ways for it to connect to the pipe. You've got lugged, which is screws come in from both sides through the flange on the pipe and into the valve. And then there's wafer, where there's just loops, for lack of a better term, in the valve body. And one bolt goes through the pipe flange, through the valve, through the next pipe flange, and then you tighten it on with nuts on the other side. And so the point is that somebody came to me, they wanted a butterfly valve. They're with the city of wherever. And their description was wafer, and that's not uncommon. So I thought, okay. So I quoted it, they ordered it, they got it, and they were like, hey, what's the deal? The bolt, it needs like long bolts to go through. And I was like, well, you asked for a wafer. But luckily I was able to look through my emails, and it wasn't a mistake I made, which isn't definitely not an egotistical thing. It's more like I hate making mistakes. So I'm glad when it was not me. So anyway, and then I was able to educate them, but I was also able to say, you can use this, just use longer bolts. This was less expensive. This was technically easier to install. If you want the other, we can work something out. So definitely CYA.
Yeah. And then I have to say, I think sales, it takes a lot of leadership skills. It may be, and I tell people, like, look, leadership is everywhere. It's not always like a direct report, like someone that works for you and you're their leader. Sales is a form of indirect leadership, right? You're influencing them. You need to lead them, like I said, to their desired outcome, because they often don't know what that is sometimes. I mean, in your case, sounds like you're working with clients that are buying the stuff. They kind of know what they want, but some clients, like you said, in consultative sales, I was in the IT services business. They really don't know what they want. They just know they want it to work. And so, there's a lot of, leading them, and that, to your point, you do need to educate them, and that, builds a major component of sales, which is trust. If you're really helping them, you're educating them, you're helping them not make mistakes, helping them get the right thing, man, that builds a ton of trust capital. And those clients over time, those transactions, those sales, I loved winning so much trust capital with clients where they would go, Dale, if you say that's what I need, how soon can we get it? Yeah. Man? Like, that was it. That was the conversation. And I love that, because that was my goal, like to work with integrity and earn that trust that we could just get things done,
build that relationship. And to me, it's important. It also helps me keep honest, and not that I need too much help with that, but it's like, I always looked at, I want the return business. I need to sell a valve today, but I need to sell one tomorrow too.
Yeah.
And what's going to have them coming back? Well, being a small operation, I'm really one of five. And that includes one person's the accounting department, and one person is inside and shipping, and then one person is just inside, and then the other person's the owner. So small group, I explained to people that, hey, part of us is our value add is being your consultant. Not every answer I'm going to come up with is going to include buying something from me, and I'll help you troubleshoot a valve problem even if it's not my valve, in the hopes that I'd replace it. But there have been times where, okay, well, you got an air leak. That's what it is. And I hope that in the future, that's what leads to more business, because my willingness to help. And I kind of explained it too, like, you got your big houses where they do pipe valves, fittings, and all kinds of stuff. And the way I explain it is, those guys are great. We do business with people like that. But where they don't specialize in valves, I can very specifically help you troubleshoot, because this is all I do. Kind of like a specialist, like a doctor. You got your rheumatoid arthritis doctors, you got your podiatrists, and so your heart doctors. So that's the way I swing it. And then but yeah, like with military stuff, it's all about presenting information. A customer versus an officer, I can say, well, here's the problem, and this is where people miss the mark on don't present problems without solutions. So I'll present a problem, but I present the solutions with it to the decision maker. And that's where, whether it's an officer or a customer, I say, okay, here's the problem, here's the issue, and here's 3 solutions, pros and cons to each, and my recommendation. And then they decide.
Right.
And whatever they think is best, go with my recommendation. Don't. It's up to them completely. And
yeah.
And I don't know, it's easy for me to remove the emotion from that too, because I did my best to give them what they need. But again, with officers, sometimes there's a little bit of ulterior motive in there, like, well, I really don't want to make all my Joes unload all those Connexes again and count everything, so I'm going to try to recommend a solution where we don't do that. But but that's, other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
So you had mentioned earlier, just kind of like one of your motivations for serving was, instead of saying thank you for your service, you want to go serve. Like, so at this point, with obviously your military service so far and what you're doing with Unbroken Veterans, like, do you feel fulfilled in that initial motive?
Yeah, for the most part. And are you talking about just the service or Unbroken Veterans, or both?
Both.
Yeah, I would say so. I'm coming up for my contract being up next April, and it's my second contract that I'm finishing, and the next one I'll have to go indefinite and basically finish out 20. And so I'm moving more and more toward being done. And I know there's more people than not that regret getting out, or they say, don't do it. You're past halfway there. And yes, but my rebuttal is always, if I asked you to run 20 miles, mile 12, it's not going to start getting easier. Plus, I also can see where some guys have a break in service where they serve however many years and then they get out, probably for the similar reasons as me. And then they come back to it. I don't think I'll come back. I think I'm ready to move on. But a big piece missing from my first contract was that I didn't deploy. That was an important education that I wanted. And the irony is that I re-upped partly because of TRICARE and partly because so in the reserve, you can stay in the same unit for your whole career. So like, for instance, other than changing from a detachment platoon that was a part of our company to now I'm in the main company, which happened back in 2015, that change. But I've really been in the same company for my entire career, which will sound crazy to some people. So I'm going with this is the leadership changes over time, as one can imagine, just like anywhere. And so there was a leadership change for the better. And so between TRICARE and having a daughter on the way, and then leadership changes, the unit improving, I was kind of interested to stay. And then right after I re-upped, I want to say like a few months, they were like, we have been elected to deploy. And I was like, oh man, here we go. And I don't know. Like, I would have wanted to volunteer, but I didn't volunteer. It's one of those things where something I wanted and I got it through force. I wouldn't have done that to my wife with a kid that young, but it just happened that way, clearly.
Yeah, you wanted to kind of have it on. You were expecting to kind of volunteer to deploy, kind of have it on your terms, where you kind of re-up, and 2 months in, you got a little one, and
yeah. So that was an interesting deal for sure.
So where'd you end up? Where'd you deploy?
So I went to Afghanistan. Nick and I were there from I don't say we got on ground in like July 5th or 6th of 2019. And then we came back in the helter-skelter spring of 2020.
Yeah. Jeez.
I mean, April 10th was the day I got back to Kansas City, where I'm from. And the COVID stuff was insane, for sure. I mean, the government, nobody, and I jokingly talk trash on the government. I seriously talk trash sometimes, but in all fairness, nobody had any idea what was going on with any of that. I mean, I'll never forget, there was word of it when we were still in Afghanistan, and we were just finishing up. I'm talking, we had all our gear turned in, our vehicles were turned over to whatever new officer coming in was going to be in charge of them. We weren't doing missions anymore. And then there was talk of it, and we're just kind of like, oh, it's crazy, but most of us chalked it up to, when SARS was and bird flu and all that, swine flu. And so, and I know there's a great debate as to whether it was or wasn't. I have no interest in showing my hand as to which side I'm on of the opinion scale, but to go into the experience as it was, I'll never forget. So we worked pretty hard to keep a warrior mentality when we were over there. We were on Bagram the whole time, which is a difficult place to keep the warrior mentality. I mean, you got Wi-Fi, I don't know if you pass through there, but it's like a Disneyland, it's not, so many people just were under the disillusion that they weren't in a third world country at war, because of how big it is, how protected it is. So anyway, we finally went to a movie at the MWR, and partway through, all of a sudden it was all turned off. Like, what's happening? And they're closing the MWR, and we're all confused. And so then we had to go back to our barracks. And so then come to find out that everything was just closing down on base. At this point, we'd even turned in our ammo. We were within 2 days of leaving. So we left in the next couple of days. None of the mask stuff had come out yet. None of the other kind of craziness, but they definitely wanted people separate, which was interesting because they weren't letting us be outside. Again, this is back in the early phases when things just kept flipping back and forth as to what you're supposed to do. They wanted us, we couldn't be outside, so we had to be in the building, the circulated, vented air from one room to the next. So in terms of respiratory things, way worse situation than outside, although Afghanistan being so polluted, I guess it's debatable. But point being that, so we made it out of Afghanistan within about a day of them closing off that opportunity. So we got to Kuwait and found out that we were one of the last flights out. And we were in Kuwait for about 3 days, which was a day and a half or so longer than we were supposed to be. And on the way out, again, trying to maintain some warrior mentality. Kuwait, for those who don't know, is the vacation deployment. It's not combat. It's in a very safe area. They've got, shrimp for lunch. There's, football fields and track and volleyball stuff and beautiful gyms and pools. And, people are there. It's like a purgatory in the Middle East. And so we avoided all that, again, to keep that warrior mentality. But when we were coming back to Kuwait, we're like, we're going back to States. We're going to go to the steakhouse. We're going to do all that stuff. And all of it was closed. Not a and they have Starbucks. I mean, not a Starbucks was open or Taco Bell or anything. And so, we basically played volleyball and twiddled our thumbs for 3-ish days. And then we left, flew through Germany and New Hampshire, and then got to Fort Bliss. And the morning, which is basically the next day. So that morning, there was a worldwide military 60-day no travel order put out. So, I mean, I made it to Bliss barely. And that would have been another 60 days at least before I could, then go through the 2-week process at stateside before seeing my family. So
this must have been like March 2020, because that's when things really just.
Oh yeah, it was March. Yeah. It was late March.
Yeah.
And then we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. They had tents in the desert. And it was very interesting because it was very, it was like bittersweet, but on very opposite ends of the scale. So we had tents and we had cots, and there were occasional wind and dust storms, but they had like somehow these frames and glass doors for the tents. So that was interesting. And then we had yard time because we couldn't, be in the activity area at the same time as other tents because people had gotten there at different times. So they put them in different tents and kind of kept a clock on the 2-week quarantine. And then from there, they, so there was Wi-Fi, but ours was garbage. But then they had these trailers. Some people probably seen them, these, trailers with the bathroom and everything. And those are very nice. And so I was like, okay, like place to shower, place to use the restroom, clean. I can take that over poor Wi-Fi. And so, and then we flew. Then we got, after 2 weeks of that, they were able to compress 2 weeks of demobilization into a day and a half, which was appreciated, but it kind of makes you scratch your head over all the other times it takes 2 weeks. But then being around on Fort Bliss, again, the back and forth, the craziness of the COVID. At first, MPs were yelling at us because we were supposed to wear a mask outside, not inside. And then obviously that changed background. So it was just, it was insanity. And so we had I have a picture of a friend of mine. When we were going from the tents in the desert to the main post, the Army had administered these literal ShamWows with holes cut and rubber bands pulled through them to keep them on our faces, the mask, because they didn't have masks or anything else. And so it was quite the experience. But
yeah, it's like a lot of decision whiplash through that period, like this first 3-4 months, like March on. It was so crazy, like so much news, and this week it's this, and next week it's that. Man, it's just as far as your time in Afghanistan itself,
mm-hmm.
Was there anything that kind of like shaped your experience that you took away from, because you were voluntold, which right. wasn't kind of your game plan, but you got to go. Was there any kind of like stuff that you learned about yourself or about your service or anything like that when you were over there?
Yeah, I learned a lot about some of the Army mentality that I haven't been exposed to because I've been in the reserve. As far as how the big Army can function, the pros and the cons. I mean, I hate to be critical, especially still being in, because it's kind of a gray area as far as what all I can go into. But I look at it as talking about leadership failures that I saw. And it's easy. And I work very hard to not be negative about it. Because I don't want it to sound like I'm bitching, but I think that people that are wanting to know how to be better leaders or that are wanting to get in, I think they can hear experiences from people like myself. I'm not the only one with experiences. I think they can hear those experiences and apply them to their own leadership style, because some stuff was extremely frustrating. And I kind of got to the saying that, like, some days the biggest enemies were on base with me, not outside. And that's because of people, either not wanting to listen to other avenues of thinking, or they had their own agendas. And that happens at all levels. I definitely dealt with other NCOs, my level as well, that were not good. And so for instance, our job is to find IEDs, and we were good at our job. People like to talk trash in the reserves, and I can tell you right now, I don't care who you are, what your experience is, in both active and reserve, there's good units and there's bad units. We fell in behind a bad unit that was active duty. And I'm not saying they were bad because they're active duty, but they were a bad unit and they happened to be active duty. And it showed in their vehicle maintenance. It showed in their repertoire, or in their relationship with locals and other people on base, as far as getting stuff fixed or things like that, logistics. And so, but one frustrating thing was our job was to handle IEDs, and our platoon specifically practiced hard at vehicle recovery, so we could quickly deploy a tow bar. A lot of units that they don't, or platoons rather, don't necessarily practice that stuff all the time. And to me, that if you're working with vehicles, you should know how to recover a vehicle quickly, because everything to me is time on target. As soon as you stop to do anything on convoy in a combat zone, there's a clock that is ticking, and could take hours before anything happens. Nothing could happen. Or, it could take the enemy's close by and they can get a mortar squad together in 10 minutes and start hitting you with artillery. So you just don't know. So you want to be as fast as possible. Also, because you don't want your mission that's planned for 6 hours to become 12 or something. So things like CASEVAC, medevac, we practiced all that. And so after a little while, the higher ups decided, which was outside of our unit, decided they wanted to be a part of our validation lanes, because weekly we would run rehearsals in validation lanes for practice. And so they wanted to start being a part of that, and it just wrecked it. And so at one point, to give you a little background on the job and how some of the stuff works. So we mostly do road IED searches, but we do dismounted as well on foot. And we were doing that in Afghanistan. And so you have your combat engineer, your route clearance, you're familiar with these things called enablers, which just means, like mine detector, but it's a lot more than that. There's IEDs with no metal parts. So the term mine detector is not really a good description of what all stuff we're carrying around with us. So we've got stuff that detects carbon. We've got stuff that detects wires. So we've got all these things. Now, here's the thing. None of them work on asphalt, because some of them use stuff like ground penetrating radar, things like that. Asphalt is too thick. But also, no one's going to walk up to asphalt with a shovel and bury an IED. It's just physically not going to happen. So that's where, no one had explained that we were supposed to simulate anything else than what we were doing, and we were doing a validation lane on asphalt. And when there was a simulated hit on an IED on a vehicle behind us, we jumped out of the truck, we grabbed the litter as the designated CASEVAC team. We ran back to the truck to notionally do CASEVAC. And so after we did, this captain comes up and he's like, did you guys scan the road before you ran back to that vehicle? And we're like, no, other than with our eyes. And he's like, well, why did you not do that? And we were like, because, well, A, you don't have to, because they can't bury stuff there, and B, the enablers don't work anyway. There's physically no way to scan, plus the fact you don't need to. And then he was like, what do you mean by enablers? And we held him up. And he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, why are you validating me right now? Like, why? You clearly have no knowledge of what's going on. We were fine doing our own thing, and you guys had to get involved. And so that's kind of one of my main gripes that I experienced, or examples. As far as learning about myself, I was curious to get into a conflict to see, how I would really react. I feel like I've always been pretty good at reacting to a situation, a less than desirable situation, especially if it unfolds fast. And so, but the way I saw it is I never really knew unless I was in combat. That's one of the reasons I wanted to be. Not because I'm an adrenaline junkie or because I like fighting or anything, but how, I don't know how else to really know yourself than in a moment of true chaos. And so I was in a vehicle that was hit by an IED. And so now I know. Gunfight is always different too. And so, but as far as being in a vehicle that's hit by an IED, I reacted according to training, and we all conducted ourselves as we would. It was a non-concussive IED, so it was what you call a DFFC, a directionally focused fragmentation charge. It's basically a bunch of screws and nuts and bolts packed in front of an explosive element, and it's in a tube, and so it shoots it all out at breakneck speed. I've got pictures of the truck that's all torn up, and you're talking hard cast metal parts of the truck. Just it looks like something took a bite out of it because the screw passed through the metal at the speed of Mach Jesus. And so but the RGs that we ride in are so up armored that none of that stuff pierced the actual hull of the vehicle.
Wow.
And so that was good. And our gunner happened to be facing this other direction where there was a post, because there's a roof on his gunner's hatch. And so there's the post, so it protected him. And so, a lot of it.
So you guys hit it, no injury or casualty?
No injury casualty. Shockingly, even though we had 3 flat tires, we were able to drive back to base. And the driver's not particularly a good driver. Love him. He's hilarious. But he was notorious for not being a good driver. So he even got us back. And he was, there's funny stuff from it too. I mean, like we're driving along and he's like, "Hey, Sergeant, something's wrong with the steering." And we're like, "What?" And he's like, "When I brake, it does this." And he slams on the brakes and the whole vehicle veers left hard. And then he corrects it. And we're like, "Well, then don't do that." And the other kind of funny part of the story is it happened in this place where, I don't know, however long before that, we were going through there on another mission. And I didn't know what was happening because I was a couple of vehicles back. But the lead vehicle, there was a donkey in the middle of the road. And the lead vehicles had these light duty arms, these interrogation arms, which are used for kind of checking stuff out. It's got a little gripper claw on there. And so he used the arm to try to kind of like coax the donkey out of the road, and it wouldn't go. And then he finally got frustrated, and he basically pushed the donkey with his arm, and this donkey fell in this little ditch. It was kind of stuck. And so then we drove through, and I saw the donkey, and my truck wondered why it was in the hole, but we were like, it's Afghanistan, you never know. We saw a dog on a roof once, no idea how it got there, so we moved on. So we actually, as we were driving down the road before getting hit, we were joking about the donkey, and we're like, yeah, the thing's, because somebody said this is the road where the donkey was, and we were like, yeah, the donkey's probably pissed. It's probably in the Taliban now. It's gonna blow us up, and then boom, that's when it happened. So there's definitely humor to it, and then we trained many times for that scenario. Obviously, having never been in it, and one thing that was funny was we always train, always where there's one, there's two as far as IEDs. And so just because one went off doesn't mean there's not more. And so I went to look out my window to see if there's any more. And that's when I realized, after years of looking out a window to see if there's more IEDs after a simulated det, there was dust and smoke everywhere. So I couldn't see anything. Sure. And so I was kind of like, well, okay, I did my due diligence, can't see shit. And so went to the radios, because a lot of electronics are reset and that kind of thing. And so went to making sure we were getting the radios up so that we could talk to the rest of the convoy and at least say no casualties, that kind of thing. And so, so that was one of those things I wanted to know about myself. And I would never put anyone in harm's way or do anything to put myself in a scenario to figure it out. But I was interested to be in a scenario like that to get that answer. And so I was blessed that I got that answer, and no one was hurt at all in the making of getting that answer. And of course, 3 other people got their answer too. So, yeah.
So as far as Nick's concerned, did you meet Nick in the service or in deployment, or where did you guys cross paths?
So we're in the same unit, and we kind of knew each other. We were in different platoons, and then when we deployed, they changed the personnel up. So Nick and I were in the same platoon. We were just in different squads. He was the team leader. I was the team leader. We were in different squads. We actually were across the hall from each other in Afghanistan. It's kind of like we'll call it a dorm, for lack of a better term. But we were living in Connex boxes. So, but it was kind of funny. So we knew each other. And we joke around all that, but we weren't super close or anything. And now, we talk on a semi-daily basis. But yeah, so we were the same platoon. He was on that mission when I got blown up. And there are other missions where our first mission we went on called a RIP mission. When you're coming in to replace another unit, you'll go with them. You'll break your guys up and different, you'll have send a few guys on each mission with the old unit to see what they're doing before they leave. And then after a week or so of that, everyone's kind of been on a mission or two. And so Nick and I were in a vehicle together with another guy, good friend of mine. And so we were on a RIP mission together. And so it's kind of interesting that my first mission in Afghanistan and my last, Nick was on, but he and I were in the same vehicle a couple times, including that first one. And the first one was weird because they didn't have enough comms for the 3 of us. There was 1 or 2 headsets. So we'd kind of trade off the headsets so we could hear what was going on in the car and the truck. So To kind of round it out, as far as fulfillment from the military, I think I'm there. I love training soldiers and giving them information, but the Army's making that increasingly more of a pain in the ass for me. And where I've got a daughter who's 5 and a son who's going to turn 2 here in a couple months, I just look at it as I got soldiers at home I need to be training.
Sure.
And yeah, so that kind of rounds out my experience and being fulfilled. I'd say I'm feeling fulfilled as far as my time in the service. And as far as Unbroken Veterans, I think when I'm out, I'm going to have more time to devote to Unbroken Veterans. And I think we're still in early stages. I think we've got the right idea. I think some of the stuff we're doing right now is going to stay, but I think we're still figuring out exactly our angle and how we're going to fit in. And it came about because Nick, being a veteran, he only had a couple months left after we got back. He didn't have much time in service left. And so he got out. I don't know, but 6 months after we got back from Afghanistan or so. And so he was trying to get all this information on veteran benefits, and he couldn't find any. He's looking at podcasts, and there weren't really any podcasts. Just divulging, go to this place, talk to this person, here's how this works. And then, so he kind of had, he absolutely had the idea for the podcast. And then he came over to my house to ruck, because I found out he moved into a similar part of town as me. And so he came over for us to ruck on this trail. For those of you who don't know what that is, military rucking, Army rucking, you're basically got a big bag on your back, ideally an actual backpacking backpack, with the frame and everything. But, you got a backpack, a JanSport, whatever it is, you're rucking, baby. And so he came up. Yeah,
that's a thing. If you guys don't know look it up. And you go on YouTube, whatever. But you can find ruck packs and weights, and a lot of people ruck with like 50-pound packs plus, whatever. Yeah. It's a good little workout, right? You're not just going for a walk. You're like toting 50 pounds for however many miles you're.
Well, especially that you can decide like how far and how much weight. And right. I went pretty heavy weight because it was just so much better when you cut back. But yeah, so he came over for ruck, and then before he headed off, he told me what he's interested in doing and asked me if I'd help out. And so I said absolutely. Some of my sales skills translate because I got to produce. We have to cold call people, say, hey, you interested in being on the podcast? We got to explain who we are. When you call these people, we've had some higher profile people, and then some not as high, just in terms of probably recognition. So like Dr. Rachel Yehuda, she's a pretty big name, at least if you're aware of the psychiatric industry. And actually, I'm reading a book right now on generational health and healing generational wounds. And she's actually quoted in one of the chapters. And so that was interesting because I'm like, oh, I've met her. Talked to her for an hour. Yeah. So yeah, it takes some skill to call up and say, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm calling. And so that's been good. And then also kind of Nick's a smart guy and he's picking it up. And so, but where I have more experience, it's good for me to be able to say, well, here, Nick, or we'd make a template, that kind of thing too, especially for emails where, template of, hey, here's who we are, here's what we're doing.
What, where'd the name come from? Like, what's the background on it?
The basis for it came from a guy I know. I've known him for years because their family lived down the street from us when I was in kindergarten. So I played with his daughter and I were friends. And then they moved away, but we still went to school together for years. So I've known him most of my life, actually, which is kind of funny to think about now. I was talking to him at one point. He was a Marine, and we were talking, and he was talking about some work he was doing. And he just said, and I'd heard the phrase before, we are not broken. And that's because there's such stigma behind a lot. It's kind of funny that people in the military, most of them don't want to be considered as heroes. Hey, I was just doing my job as part of it. And then, but we also, when people, it's a delicate thing because people talking about, they're broken, they're wounded, we need to fix them. And it's not, hey, we've had some experiences and some of us have had worse luck than others, but we're not broken. We can function in society. We can, just because I lost my arm doesn't mean I can't be a contributing member of society in some way. And so it's part of the mentality that the fight's never over. And so Unbroken was just kind of, I can't remember. We looked at a couple different names. Another thing that helped shape it is Google and looking up names to make sure we weren't too much alike. There's another one, I think saw it today, and it was similar but different enough yet that you could delineate between the two of us. But that was another thing that shaped it was, okay, when we Google it, what else comes up? So for Unbroken Veterans, nothing came up. And so there we went. And then the logo was a funny story too, because I mean, I like taking pictures of guns and kind of editing the photos and things like that. And that's about the extent of my artistic skill other than just talking. And so, so we tried to make our own logo is where I'm going with this. And, I feel like Nick is more skilled than me, but to be honest, neither of us are graphic designers remotely. And so we had this just awful. I mean, it looked like we got licensed photos, and then I threw in a photo of my own that I'd taken of something. But it was just like, it was like 4 squares of these pictures. It just looked like someone went on Google Images and threw these images together. You know, it looked awful. And my wife was like, and she's very supportive. And she's supportive in the way that I love, where she's going to tell me if it looks like trash. And I'm glad she does, because this is something we take seriously. We want it to be good. We want the constructive criticism. So granted, she is more delicate. She wouldn't tell me it looks like trash. She would just basically imply that I should go a different route. And so she does have care like that, where it's like some of my buddies are probably telling me it looks like trash. And they'd be right. And so anyway, she recommended me to somebody that, or recommended us to somebody that did graphic design. And so we reached out to her, and she took what we did, and basically, it's got the 4 or 5 helmets on there. So she basically drew those helmets and like laid it out way better. When I got it back, I was like, okay, yeah, this is what we wanted. And there was no way for the rest of my life working at it, I could have gotten this. So the end result was way better than our original attempt.
Now, do you have any like key episodes that you guys have done that you found to be like the most either impactful from you, like from the guest, or like you actually learned something, like brought a lot of value? Anything kind of stick out at what you've done so far?
It's so funny because we have so much information already just in 23 episodes that I'll re-listen to an episode, not to hear my own voice, but sometimes more often than not to critique us. And but I'll hear stuff and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, you know. And like, it's kind of funny because one of our episodes is on the GI Bill, but that's one of those subjects so expansive. There's things I learned about the GI Bill, and not at any fault to who we interviewed at all. You know, this is a full interview, but there's stuff I learned about the GI Bill at least in 2 other interviews that were kind of parallel. So like helmets to hard hats, that's a good one, especially if it almost what episode would benefit somebody almost depends on what they're looking for. But like helmets to hard hats, they tell us that, which we had no idea, that GI Bill will cover trade school. And so that's like, to me, that's one of the most important pieces of information I've uncovered. Not that I'm going to go, but for me to tell other people, because I think colleges now, I think they're so overrated, especially for what you're paying. And in a lot of cases, not necessary. There's a lot of argument for trade schools, and that's yet another very heavy argument. If you're thinking of going to the military, or you have gotten into the military and you're in there now, figuring out how to transition to the civilian world, if you're willing to learn a more blue-collar job, which, you know, no shame in that, being the industry needs electricians, they need plumbers. So if you're able to get that education covered by the military and go in with probably no debt into working a job that actually pays pretty well. I know, especially electricians, those jobs can pay pretty well. So to me, that's a big thing, because not everybody wants to go do some difficult job or go get their MBA, and not everybody needs to. And so the fact that gap is bridged by that is pretty good. Our first episode holds a pretty good place in my heart, just because Tim was such a good interview. He's such a lively guy. and the information was really good as well. But each interview definitely probably carries some important information. The one with Dr. Yehuda, I'll never forget. That the I'm trying to think how to lay it out. Basically, I asked about some of my issues are especially early on years ago, self-confidence, things like that. And so I asked her how to instill confidence in my kids, and her answer was basically showing them you trust them by letting them fail and execute tasks. And I mean, that's because you want to help your kid. You're seeing them struggle to stab a piece of meat with their fork and eat it, and you want to help them, but you're helping them by not helping them.
Yeah.
And that was something big, because I've got young kids and I don't want to screw them up, or at least a lot less than the average person maybe. So I take fathering pretty seriously, and so that was a big one that stuck with me as well. So there's probably pieces from every episode that I would say are pretty valuable pieces of information.
Yeah, I like what you said. I was thinking when you were talking about the trades, and earlier in the conversation we were talking about your infantryman or Marine grunt or whatever, and you're like, what do I do when I get out? And and that's a great point. Those are on the move jobs, right? So if you're an infantry or Marine grunt, whatever, with 311, whatever, and you go, all I know how to do is shoot a rifle and ruck, and I'm not going to pay the bills doing that, and but those jobs, like in the trades, those are on the move jobs. So really, if you're coming, from that MOS area, you probably don't want that white collar job. You probably aren't looking to sit behind a desk, probably drive you bananas, So yeah, I think that's a good point. The what other things are you seeing kind of like in this journey? What are the struggles of a transitioning veteran? Like, what are they up against? What are they missing? What do they need to know? I mean, obviously listening to your show and, seeing all the different things, because you got, VA housing, all the things that you would want to know. It's a great, menu of sorts to kind of find some answers. But I guess, for the veterans listening or, active duty thinking or getting out or whatever the case may be, like what are they missing? Where do they screw up?
I wouldn't even say they screw up. It's you don't know what you don't know. And I think a couple big pieces of transitioning, and some of this is just from what I've seen, because everyone. There's probably a handful of different struggles, and everyone experiences one, maybe a couple of them. I doubt very many people experience all of them. And so there's some I'm not going to know, partly because I've been in reserve the whole time. So I've had a civilian career. So it's pretty easy for me to pull out of the military when I kind of already have this going on. But I would say that the two kind of big ones are the emotional support, and to be specific, when you're in the military, and I've served time on active as far as basic training and, 2 weeks of, sometimes up to a month almost of active duty orders and stuff here and there. So I've lived some of that life for sure. And you were told where to be, who to be there with, what uniform to wear, and what time. And so you were forced in a situation, you end up making friends, but when that force goes away, and there's this really good Instagram account called Mandatory Fun Day, and he's got so many good videos that just point out the whole hilarious hypocrisies. But there's a couple there's a series he does kind of intertwined where it's like a veteran in a normal workplace. And so it's like, them, it's not transitioning in a funny way. And so, where you're just like, okay, we'll just show up to here between this time and this time. They'll kind of tell you what to do. But other than that, you're on your own. It's kind of like, you're not forced into that situation where you're interacting with these guys. And so Monkey Brain Art interview is good because we talk about that. And they're like, I almost liken it to them. They're like a formation. You show up to formation and you see these guys and gals now, and you maintain or you formulate a relationship. And it's a little harder to do that, when everyone goes to work, they do their job, most of them keep their heads down, and then they all got lives outside of there. So it's hard to formulate a connection, human connection, like you and I, you were talking about earlier, humans needing that connection. And so I think that's part of it. So I think it's important for veterans to stay connected to each other, but also to find groups. A friend of mine got out I want to say within the last year or so. He's super into hunting, and he's got a hunting dog, and he found a group where they all meet up and do hunting dog stuff. I mean, there's this formation right there is kind of what I call it. It's showing up to his formation. Here's the time, here's where to be, and then he's going to make friends based on that. And so I think that's a big piece. I think another part is, I'm seeing this outside the veteran community too, is people don't know how to get a job. And because it's so easy to say, okay, you get out of the military, go get a job. Or, oh, you're having trouble paying your bills, go get a different job. Yeah, that is the solution, but it's such a vague way to, like, they may not know how. And it's not that it's a difficult process, but you have to have some idea what you're doing. You have to know how to present yourself. You have to know where to look or what kind of jobs are out there. A lot of people don't know what kind of jobs are out there. Sales probably covers 50% of the job market in one capacity or another, but people hear sales and they think like a used car lot. And that is so far from the majority of types of sales. I'm just using that as examples. I'm in it. But like when you walk into a McDonald's bathroom and you look at the paper towel dispenser, there is a guy that sells paper towel dispensers to McDonald's for a living. Like, that's a sales job. McDonald's says, we're building new McDonald's. We need 4 of these and whatever. So again, the point being that they don't know where to look or how to look. And it's kind of something Nick and I have been talking about and working on. We're going to try to have a fillable form PDF on our website. So, if you're interested, keep checking out our website. We are a slow moving vehicle with all the other stuff we have going on in life. Just ask Dale. It took months to get this interview together, but we are a slow moving vehicle, but that PDF will get there. And the idea being that they can put their phone number here, their address here, their name here. They can fill it out in this way to make it easy. Okay, well, now they at least have a PDF, a PDF of their resume. Okay, that's kind of difficult, and it's not. Yeah, I have a resume that's good, and that I've gotten jobs with it. I don't know if it's the best one. I've heard people say it looks good, and whatever. But then also trying to figure out how we can talk. How do you go find a job? Is it simple as just going on LinkedIn or Monster or whatever? And it is and it isn't. Again, but, going back to that 25% closing rate. If you call 100 businesses, you might get, 25 for 25%. You might get 25 opportunities for job interview. Okay, well, the job interview is not the job interview. So now it's your closing rate on your new chances. So your new, what's 25% of 25? And so it goes down from there. And that's where the skill comes in. Being able to talk to people, present yourself, answer questions, knowing what kind of questions they're going to ask in the first place and how to respond. Like if somebody says, Dale, what's your weakness as an employee? And then it's kind of like the trick is to make a strength sound like a weakness. And so, like I work too much or something. It's just an example,
my weakness is you hire me, I'm going to be your hardest worker. And some
exactly. Like yeah. People don't like me because I work harder than them. You're right. Like something, I'm sure someone could class it up way better than I just did, but that was off the top of my head. So, but people don't know that stuff. And there's a lot of groups of people that are trying to help them out, but you don't hear about them. And that's kind of where we come in. We're trying to get word out. You don't hear about them, or then, some people, one of the several things the Army taught me is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so at the end of the day, I can go out and I can hold someone's hand and make them aware as possible of every opportunity or way to enhance their life, but they still have to do it. Even if I go interview for them wearing a mask, I can't go to their job every day and help them maintain that job. So, if we can at least help the people that are willing to follow through, that's a big step in the right direction.
Yeah. And that's, you've been talking about the numbers game, and that in itself is a numbers game, right? The more veterans you can get in front of, and the more likely, a percentage of them are going to take the steps that they wouldn't have otherwise, unless they got that information from you guys.
Right. Or they have the 1-2 and the not know how. And then when I said, we go click on this link and you can submit your application. Then if they call you, go see them. There's the how to. And then they can take all their willingness. and attack.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned confidence earlier, and no listener here of Lions Guide podcast hadn't heard this before, but it's why I promote clarity so much. Is like, you won't make moves unless you're clear on what the moves are, and like you said, like, and rightfully so, or you corrected me. It's like, they don't know what they don't know, so you're really imparting, a fair amount of clarity. Like, hey, here's what you do need to know. Here's what the opportunities are, and here's where you go, and here's the steps, and here's what you can expect to get out of it. And that's where confidence comes from, right? We fear the unknown, right? We're not going to move.
Oh yeah.
When we don't know, like that's a quick way to get stuck. And I tell people like, well, I'm stuck or I don't know what to do. Well, start researching, start asking questions, ask someone who's been there, whatever, and start getting that clarity, because clarity builds confidence. Confidence, creates courageous action. And now you're moving, you're moving in the right direction. So.
Yeah. Clarity is huge, because, communication is probably one of the most important skills I've found between both civilian and military career, because it's kind of amazing what people will let you do or help you do if you're clear about your intentions, and especially in your execution. I mean, it's like I may or may not have parked a military vehicle at my house because I asked the police escort if I could do that. And there was some forethought. There's some other skill involved as far as planning. And luck. There's a lot of luck involved. But at the end of the day, I took somebody aside, maybe, allegedly, and said, hey, what are you doing, after you are done with us? Well, I'm on overtime. Awesome. Can I ask you another question? Okay. Could we alter the route a little bit? Where are we going with this? And I may have explained exactly what I wanted to do. And just black and white. And I knew they were going to say yes or no. And they said yes. And then the only stipulation was, let me check with my partner when they arrived. That guy showed up. The one guy asked the other guy. He was good with it. So I may or may not have a picture of a military vehicle in my driveway, because I had a plan and I was extremely clear. Granted, it was an authority figure, but I was extremely clear about what my intentions were and how I wanted to execute it. And they let me do it. So, I mean, I've got some pretty good stories, but I mean, for every good story I have, there's a lot of no's that would have otherwise resulted in a good story. And so that's something for people to remember, is you're going to get a lot of no's. That's something my 5-year-old daughter's learning now. You got to accept some no's and then be glad for the yeses.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're talking about father, and, because it goes back to that saying, as far as being clear what you want, right? I had to explain to my kids that saying, maybe you heard it, like a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And I was explaining to him, because I was taking them to camp, and then we stopped at Dunkin' Donuts on the way, and my kids like mumbled, because I make them do their own orders and stuff, and my little one kind of like mumbled a little bit, so I corrected them, like, hey, get your hand out of your mouth, look at them, talk clearly, and he told her, eventually what he wanted like a snack wrap or something, but we get in the car, and he goes, hey man, this is a bacon snack wrap, I wanted the sausage one. And I say, Did you tell her that? And I spent the rest of the ride at camp going, hey man, closed mouth don't get fed. You got to speak up. If you wanted that sausage snack wrap, and I said, you got to remember that, and I even took it back. I was like, because we got little bird houses here that had birds in it. I said, when you open the nest to check the chicks, what do they got? They got their mouths open, right? I said, imagine, that fifth little chick, it doesn't open its mouth. What's going to happen? They're like, well, it's not going to get fed. I'm like, exactly right. You got to open up. You got to say what you want and mean it. You'll get it. People will help you get what you want. A lot of people are afraid to voice it, afraid to put it out there, man. Like, do it, man. What do you got to lose?
Yeah.
Like you said, somebody's going to say no, or so, whatever. Like, hey, move on. Move to the next one.
I forgot about most of the no's. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. What are you going to do? Let it stop you? You
give up now? Stop moving. Yeah. I'm too stubborn to give up. I don't not give up because I'm like this hard individual that's got incredible resolve. I'm just too stubborn to give up. So I'll move on to the next thing.
Yeah, 100%. So where else you guys going with the podcast? You got any other goals for it aside from kind of helping with the, the resume type stuff and all that, or?
See, we're kind of, we're letting it be pretty organic. And part of that is it makes it's a convenient approach to have when you got a lot of other stuff going on. So we're letting it kind of just grow. Again, we kind of let it decide the direction it takes. Sometimes the the idea about, so when we interview someone, we break into 2 episodes. And so the first episode featuring them is about whatever the subject is, or organization, or whatever it is. Like this most recent one, the first episode that Mike Kinney is on is about Warriors Ascent, which is what he runs, which is a basically it's a program you can join. It's 5 days, and it's for mental health. And so, but then the second episode is about Mike Kinney's experience because he's a veteran. So if we interview a veteran, as long as they're okay with it, and so far everyone has been, we've interviewed them about whatever is the subject, and then we do it at the same time, but then we cut it into a second episode featuring their veteran experience. And it's got some good questions in there. Definitely, we always get a good response from. My favorite question is, if you go back in time to the day you signed up, what advice would you give yourself? And I don't think we've ever gotten the same answer twice. We've always gotten good, solid answers.
Yeah, I imagine you do. No, that's solid.
But all that just kind of organically happened. And so it's kind of like the thing where do you want to be lucky or smart? We're lucky. That's where we're at, right? We're lucky. And so hopefully the luck doesn't run out and we can kind of keep going. We want to go to a few more events, would be in our interest. I got to get these t-shirts made so we can sell them to get some money to go to the events. But, it'd be cool if one day it's our full-time job. I mean, I would be able to work on this stuff all day. But, right now we got other commitments, other jobs, and we've lost money. So we definitely aren't close to quitting our day job anytime soon. But again, to me, it's not losing money because I always got this mentality of if I can help somebody, just one person, you can't put a price on that. Our overall goal, and I don't know how we could ever quantify this, but if our information getting out there impacts the veteran suicide rate, if enough people are able to either get help or fix their lives to where they don't feel the need to commit suicide, again, no idea how to quantify that, but if it can just be out there in the universe and information we put out, oh, that's how I go get a job. Okay. Well, then that doesn't lead to whatever road they were on. It takes them fork in the road and takes them on a different path that's more productive. That'd be great. So, the way I look at it is, lost money, but who knows what good was done with it. So
yeah, 100%. I was going to say, you can't really correlate it that way almost, right?
No, you can't.
The impact that you're delivering, right? It's a worthy investment of your time and energy and probably money, right? And you'll never know that answer. I mean,
exactly,
and that's okay. Yeah, but you can guarantee that you've impacted someone, whether you ever hear their story or not, which you can rest easy with that for sure. Definitely seeing what the content is you guys have out there, and it is a need, and we do as veterans, need these resources, and we need it thrown at us in every angle, that we can get it from, because, certainly with the, you go to these stupid government websites, they're so freaking jam-packed with you don't know where you're going, and you click here and it's just you're running in circles, and then you're just well, screw it, and then you're done. So, I think, having a good resource that just kind of breaks it down, helps you get where you want to be is huge.
Well, and I've come to see that, I knew this was a thing, but I never really thought about it in my head, but there's government ran benefit groups, like VA hospital being an obvious one. But, there's government programs that are run, maintained, paid for by the government that are good. And then there's also private organizations that are not affiliated with the government that are also good.
Yeah.
I'd say most on either side are good. So that's a whole nother thing is you go to government side, they're not necessarily going to list all the good privately ran ones that could be of interest. So that's yet another example of just where there's really no one-stop shop, which our end goal is to be that, but there's no one-stop shop yet for, I need some help. Go to this website. And then, Nick's the website guy. He's doing a pretty good job with that, but he's more of an IT guy than me. I'm 80.
What'd you say? I'm 80?
Yeah, I'm 80. Yeah. I have a flip phone if they still sold them, but they don't.
Yeah. So packing your beeper.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Oh yeah, my phone's on silent. I'm one of those asses that just never answers the phone. I'll see you call and I'll call you back, but I'm terrible. But it drives my wife crazy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, talking about mental health, I encourage people, freaking check your phone. Don't let it check you, man. Turn all that crap off, shut off all the notifications, put it on silent, and check it when you got the capacity. Don't let it thing check you every minute, throughout the day. Freaking drive you bananas. So, yeah, man. Well, Sam, bring it to a close here. But before we run, how can we find your website and what platforms, website, so on and so forth?
All right. So if you go on Google, you search Unbroken Veterans. I don't think we're the first and maybe not even the second one that comes up, but our Instagram, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, they kind of come up next. And whatever comes up first is not Unbroken Veterans. Very similar. I don't remember what it is. But the point is that those come up. The website's a .io because we're just at that tier of business right now. But I think the website might come up on Google. Obviously, it's going to be shared in the notes today on the podcast. But of course, it is also shared on all of our social media, which comes up, pretty early on in the Google search, at least on the first page. So those are, I wish it could be a little easier one day. Hopefully it is, but it's a relatively easy way to find us, get a hold of us. We have a spot on our website. You can message us. And then of course on all those media, you can message us. Please bear with us. We don't check everything every day. Again, slow moving machine, but we'd love to have you reach out with just you like it or suggestions for content. We take all suggestions seriously because we look at it as we want to cater to the veteran world, not just Nick and I. So,
yeah, definitely. In Apple, Spotify?
Yeah, we're on good question. Apple, Spotify, Google. I think another one. It's an emblem I don't recognize, and again, as we've established, I'm 80. So, it's but those are all, of course, linked. We have everything linked together. Nick is a master of webbing everything together, so it should be easy to find.
Sweet. Yeah. No, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on and kind of tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And yeah, Unbroken Veterans, like I say, if you search it, you'll find it. And like I say, if you go on whatever your podcast platform is and search in there, it comes right up. So not too hard to find. So, man, Sam, I appreciate you. It's been an honor to have you on. I definitely, appreciate and honor the work that you're doing, man. Keep it up. I mean, regardless of what it's taken and frequent, infrequent, whatever, like I said, that stuff's, banking up, some veteran, next year, and you got another, 15 to 30 episodes out there, right? It's out there on the shelf for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, hats off to you, man. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. The honor is mine. And yeah, I don't think we'll quit. It may go to, we could do one episode in 6 months and then do 5 in the next, just we'll get information out as we can. And, again, I appreciate you having me on, helping spread the word. It's kind of the most common question people ask is how can we help, and just spread the word.
Yeah, man, definitely. Well, hey, Sam, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.